There's been a lot of broadcast technology innovations over the past 20 years, and it's getting interesting, especially with camera technology. There seems to be an endless amount of cameras on sports events. If there's a place for it and it adds to the production, more than likely there's been, or will be, a camera there. Mike DesRoches of Sony Electronics joins me on this episode to talk about camera technology, how it's changed over the years, how he's applied his engineering background into helping sports networks enhance their coverage, and how the technology works. There's a lot of technical information in this one, but Mike has a great way of making it easy to understand. That's all next on Sports in the Making. This episode has visuals, so if you're listening, please be sure to subscribe to the Sports in the Making YouTube channel @SportsMaking to see some of what we discuss. If you have watched any kind of sports broadcast in the last 10, 15 years, you've probably seen the products that Mike brings to the table for all the sports network. Mike DesRoches joins me to talk cameras, about his experience in the sports world with cameras, and all the cool things he's got going on. Thank you for joining me, Mike.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Don.
Mike, I'm going to give you what I think is a softball, but we didn't discuss this. Where does your love of sports come from?
Well, I'm the youngest of four, and I had a brother. I have a brother that's 7 years older, but he was a big sports guy and took me everywhere with him and stuff. So I got kind of introduced to a lot of the sports primarily through him. And then when I became kind of age where we could throw the ball around, we were constantly playing ball, and I just kind of migrated to it because it was what we did. All the neighbors, I grew up in a cul-de-sac. We had a bunch of kids that were the same age. We all got out and played. That's just what we did back then to kind of fill the time. And ironically, just yesterday I had dinner with a friend that lives in Florida that she runs the Scout of the Year Foundation for Major League Baseball. And when she worked for the Angels, she taught me how to keep score. And I've just been a huge baseball fan since I was a kid, and it just kind of grew from there.
And you were a college baseball player, is that correct?
I was, yeah. I was fortunate to play for a legendary college coach in JUCO, and then I went on to play at the Division I level for San Jose State, which was cool. That was Division I, but it got me into the Bay Area, right, leading into the boom and the bust of the .com situation. But more importantly, I got my degree in radio, TV, and film there, and started at Sony actually as an intern.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, is how did you get into this sports broadcasting, especially with Sony? It doesn't seem like a typical sports type job.
Well, it didn't start that way. It eventually got there. My hope was to be, Al Michaels. That was my dream. And so when I went to school to study radio, TV, and film, it was with the intentions of getting into broadcasting or some type of filmmaking or something like that. And first off, I heard my voice recorded, so I'm like, oh man, that's probably not going to work. But at the end of the day, when I was done playing baseball, I actually had planned to play in the minors, but my daughter wound up being born 2 weeks after my senior baseball season was finished, and so I had to kind of pivot to something else. So I started at Sony that summer as an intern, just got my foot in the door, and eventually, which we'll talk about here and there, I wound up getting a gig by turning some opportunities that I noticed in the company that were missing and leveraging some relationships, and effectively built the job that I have now, or built my way into it one step at a time.
There's not a lot of people that I would say can say what you just said, is building their own position. Explain what it is you do with Sony right now and how that pertains to the viewers at home.
So I'm currently in charge of all the sports relationships west of the Mississippi plus Wisconsin. So it's all teams, venues, regional sports networks. And then I also have the live event side of Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google. And then I also have a large system integrator based out of Minnesota. And then I have all the conferences as well that fall in those regions. And I have the LA broadcast account. So for NBC Universal, CBS Viacom, or Paramount Global as it is, and then ABC and Disney, but not ESPN, ironically. So my job is to work with the broadcast and production side of things. So it's the cinema tools as it relates to live. It's also the studio cameras, the system cameras, anything production. I do a good amount of time being spent on the creative side, athletically, with a lot of these schools and conferences and the like. But as a guy that started or did for the last 15 years before these last 5 years, where I was an engineer for us, working directly with the field, I'm a bit of a unique business development guy that has a little bit of an engineering chops to go with it. But I really pride myself as being a guy that's not this transactional salesperson that, hey, just you buy this, then you never hear from me. I'm a relationship guy first, and it's all kind of grown off that. And my love of sports, and then eventually now working with all the different sports teams, it helps to understand what it is that their plight is. And as we've talked in the past, and then we'll talk a little bit further, this getting out there and actually running a camera from time to time to contribute to these teams so they can actually see what this stuff can do for them, and then letting the real pros in their organizations run with it and just kind of flourish from there.
Well, I thought it was kind of fortuitous on how we met, because I took my son to the Denver AVEXpo, not even expecting to talk to anybody who worked in sports. But I stopped by the Sony booth, and you told me what you did, and I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And then it turns out that we had a mutual friend in common, Jim Dove, who works on ESPN's Sunday Night Baseball and Monday Night Football, who's done amazing things. When you're out on site and you're talking to these organizations, these networks, what happens with the technology, and how are you able to help them? You kind of mentioned it earlier, but expand a little bit more on that.
Well, it depends. And there's a lot of us that have very wide-ranging roles, and there are a lot of cogs in the Sony broadcast and machine and support side. However, there's only so many engineers, and that's really where the strength lies. Our strength in engineering and support, and going above and beyond to make sure that that trust that's basically given to us is not only owned and deserved, but also continually working hard to maintain. But Jim Dove, you mentioned him. There's probably scores of thousands of people that could say the same, because he's such a good guy and he's had his fingerprints on so many different careers in this industry. And so there's that. But I think it was either the Sunday before, or either the Monday before or the Monday after I saw you, that I bumped into Jim when they came through SoFi. Yeah, it was actually kind of ironic. He's just such a great guy. So he's doing his thing for Monday Night Football, and he's doing all the packages and running replays, and he's actually both hands. It's like a drummer with a kick pad and like double bass and all this stuff. And I don't know how he keeps track of all that stuff, but they're all magicians on those trucks. But my job for about 18 years was being, whether it's reality shows or news stations or corporate work or film work or whatever, sports, being the deck guy, being the camera trainer, being the person that is that red phone that if there's an issue with something. And the fact is our urgency is very different on the production level at the professional broadcast side. It's, make goods are not a good thing, right? If things go down, there needs to be response. There needs to be some type of resolve applied right away. That's kind of just the cloth by which I was cut within Sony, and I always loved working in that space, whether it was live broadcast or post or whatever. But it's an interesting industry that's very, very unique, because quite frankly, even though I'm in sales now, when I was an engineer, that phone is always with me. People that know me still know that they can call me 24/7 and that phone's going to get picked up, which is, it's difficult because it's hard to disconnect, especially when you really need to sometimes. But it's an interesting industry and interesting job with which we find ourselves in, because at the level we're required to operate at all the national trucks across the Thursday Night Football, Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Footballs, those type levels, and then all the A trucks across, they pretty much all use Sony cameras. And it's us in those responsibilities. We have to be not only responsive, but the stuff needs to answer the bell. And it does time and time and again, thankfully.
There's a lot that goes into the camera aspect of it. Obviously, the body of the camera, the lens. As a former camera operator, I'm familiar with both of those, but the technology underneath is just something, you're more the operator than the actual technician on it. But what kinds of innovations or technology has gone into some of these cameras since you've been doing it, and where do you think it's going?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a neat thing is that if we pivot away from sports for just a moment, we look at just broadcast. I worked for about 2 years with the Survivor team to get them to move from the same HD camera that they've been using for probably about 8 or 9 years, maybe 10 years. And they just, leading into this season that aired this fall back in September, they made a transition to our 4K 60p cameras so that they can basically finalize in a 10-bit format, so that not just they can up the game for their broadcast linearly, but they can also deliver to a higher streaming component and possibly raise the revenue stream there. And so that was something that they tested and tested and tested, and we supported this and this and that, and they got on board with us. And so those cameras, this is a shoulder mount camera primarily. Now they use this as well, the FX6, for some specialty cameras for tribal councils and the like, but that shoulder mount camera represents 25 years of continual feedback from the field, from those type users, from E&G operators, from sports field producers, or E&G and EFP type operators. And we tweak and we tweak and we add this and we add this. So the neat features that have come out in the last 5 to 7 years have been the pre-record features, where it's actually recording to an internal buffer, and therefore, let's say if somebody on the news side has kind of holed themselves up in a house, or if you're waiting to get that perp walk, you don't have to just continue to record. Or if you're trying to get a shot of like lightning, you can let it buffer, and then once that lightning strike hits, you hit record and you hit stop, and then it's captured down in your 4.8, whatever your pre-record buffer is, and then you walk away with just that. So those kind of features have been really helpful. But now some of these cameras are coming out with like high frame rate in it, so you can turn them into not just news cameras, but they're also true field production cameras. But they also are 2/3 inch, so they have these servo zooms that can just pull it out, turn it on, it's ready to go, and you have the wides and the super longs, and it's a lot more kind of traditional. But then you compound that with these cut cameras where they have interchangeable lenses. It's more of a film style, and you have to kind of anticipate what is your shoot that you're going to try to do, or what are you trying to get with an angle, or how much throw do you need. And covering sports where you need to be nimble and dynamic, that's difficult, versus a film shoot where you have time to reset and do your setups and swap lenses and the like. But the mentality is still very much the same. It's just quickened if you're trying to cover sports. So the technology has evolved a ton, and the biggest thing is like a camera like this, the FX6. It's the only camera in the market that exists right now that has the ability to do that pre-record buffer, but you can also do it and have high frame rate engaged and also autofocus tracking at the same time. That is a mind blower, because if you think of like the holy grail, if you're a nature photographer and you've got, say, a falcon, or nearby in my house, we've got these bald eagles that are in a perch. Right? They have this big nest in this huge tree. If you're just waiting for them to take off, you can sit there and not actually be recording anything. But you could also set the camera for not only human auto eye tracking, but also animal eye tracking. So if you got a tight lens on there that's just perched above the top of the nest, you could have it set and have, say, a 5 or 6 or 15 second buffer and shooting in high frame rate, and then you can just wait for that thing to take off. Once it does, you hit record after the fact. It lays down the previous 4 or 8 or however many you have set up in the system, and then keep going until you run out of media if you want, and then hit stop. So you can track the entire thing. So if you think about that from a sporting perspective, you literally can just shoot the touchdowns and all the melt stuff and wait for everything to happen that's good, and only lay down what is good. So if you think about baseball and soccer and all these sports where there's so much downtime and you wind up spending 2 hours loading in your stuff, that's a huge time saver. And oh, by the way, it's doing autofocus tracking as well, so you don't have to really even worry about pulling focus at times. That's great.
Those are the things I wish I had when I started my career as a camera guy.
Well, think about back to the film days, right? Yeah, that concept of, the joke I had heard when I was coming up in Sony, when my boss that hired me used to be a film shooter for Kron in the Bay Area, and he told me the story about how he first went out shooting film, and he came back and it was just reel after reel. He's like, oh my God, this is going to take us 3 hours to develop all this stuff. Can't you just shoot the touchdowns, right? Well, if I knew when the touchdowns were going to happen, that was always the funny line. But now you actually can do that.
Autofocus these days has, in my opinion, because I do use consumer and pro cameras as well, the autofocus has really progressed a lot in the last 3 years. And here's a video that you've with Sony have produced that I just want people to see.
Now here's a very common media day setup. Single operator, talent, quick little ball flip while the operator moves forward and back. Doesn't look like that much, but what's really going on here, look at the on-screen display. Track of the ball, back to the face, back to the eye, back to the ball, nailed in real time, very cool. But the recorded output is where the magic shows. This is a 5-time slow-mo where we're instantly tracking back to the eyes. Now we do a speed ramp before the ball flip, which is cool for post, but then it tracks it back to the eye. This is a single shot to be able to do this, and something you just couldn't pull manually. Let's watch it again. Real time, ball flip, pushing forward, pulling back, showing the ball. And we're at a very extreme depth of field here, and it's nailing it. So here's the on-screen display again to show you the tracking very quickly, all those calculations, but then the recording. Unbelievable. Nails the ball. You get that real filmic look, depth of field, very shallow. The ball flip is out of focus, locked onto the eyes. This is auto eye priority, and it's beautiful. So let's look at another scenario in a media day type situation. So here's a bat flip, throwing it out. And I want to show you the range that, all right, the bat's about 2 to 3 feet longer right in the barrel, and it still can track that and nails it along the way. So let's look at the real-time version of it again with the on-screen display. See how fast it tracks the eyes and the bat. There we go. Bat, back to the eyes, the face, and then the slow-mo of this again. Bam! It just nails that in an autofocus pull. So this is the point of what can be done in a produced piece, and this is the beauty of autofocus.
When we're talking about autofocus on sports, and you mentioned it before, how does the camera operator benefit from that for the networks?
Okay, well, so it depends, because that's all down to the director and the executive producer, whether they like that look or not. Now you're seeing that come out more and more. I mean, I was just watching the football games on Sunday, and watching the use of maybe the sky cam, and I noticed that I was watching the Chargers Raiders game, and it wasn't the traditional sky cam. It was more of like a higher all 22 kind of version, and it almost looked like it had a different frame rate. So it tells me that they're using maybe a lower cost solution to get that different perspective. But it's kind of the same. So everybody's kind of tweaking a little bit. But when it comes to large format and using autofocus, that's where you get this. Fox first did it with the Megalodon concept, where it was using a mirrorless camera with a person running around with a backpack and wirelessly sending that back to the truck. The problem with that is that that comes down to the local operator controlling the color, controlling the exposure, managing that, and making sure that that isn't too far off from the principal game cameras. Now, you probably have some video op, color correcting some stuff downstream in that truck. But that's not always how it has to be. There are other solutions out there. Monday Night Football uses this. I've seen the A broadcasts on CBS where they're using a Sony camera called the FX9, and that actually has remote RCP control that are using a wireless signal, and some are using the AVSs of the world as that provider for that. But that signal is actually going back to the bench where the shaders can actually remotely control that camera, but still getting that shallow depth of field. The interesting thing is that oftentimes, depending on where in the field it is, they will tend to open up more or stop down and allow that autofocus to have a better chance to track, because it's not perfect, but it has gotten so good to this point using AI and all this other technology that and also there's a bunch of different menus you can actually customize it based on the environment that you're in to say, hey, I want to be able to track this person, and now based on their eyes, it's going to stick with them inside the frame. And if there's other people coming in the foreground or wiping in front of the camera, it's not going to hunt off of those people, and it'll stay and locked onto that. So understanding that as our operator, now that these camera tools have gotten so impressive and so powerful and so accurate, it's just a matter of harnessing that power. But again, as I said at the beginning, it's not going to make it to air, and it's not even going to get tried if the director and executive producer are not on board with that look. And then there's also, do you want it to be really different in that cinematic and video gamey look versus the principal cameras, or do you want it to be stopped down where it still is cinematic, but it's not as much of a jarring kind of intercut? So it's interesting. There are different schools of thoughts across the different networks or content providers, but it's neat to see that those other tools starting to make its way into those broadcasts the last few years.
And that's where I was going with this when talking with the producer director on any of the broadcasts or productions that you're working on. Do you approach them with the idea first, hey, we could do this, or are they coming to you and asking, hey, can we get this look, and then you go apply it? Maybe a combination of both.
So it depends on the relationship that you have. Right? If you have that relationship where there's trust there, I would say that there are a couple of networks that I can reach out to on the engineering and tech ops side and say, hey, here's a toy, would you like to try? I have enough relationships with some of the crewers on these other groups where they actually have a line of sight with maybe the director or something like that. But for about 8 years, up until a couple of years ago, I was pretty much a drug dealer for Sony, in the sense that I would run around with the camera, the predecessor to the camera that's shooting me right now. This is an FS5, but the predecessor to that was an FS700. And that was an interchangeable camera that had high frame rate with an end trigger, meaning you could actually hit record after the fact and lay down a finite amount of duration. So you could kind of just shoot the touchdowns. The problem was it would only go for so long, so you had to kind of pick your battles as to, did you want the celebration or did you want the whole play developing and then cross the end zone or whatever. So the problem is I had actually pitched this to a number of different in-house broadcast groups saying, hey, well, here's a high frame rate camera that you can basically put like a Teradek bolt or something on the back end, right? Or maybe a Wave Central bag, just like they do for those broadcasts. But you could take this camera, have an operator running around the court, and you hit record after the fact, and now it's going to dump down to the media, but it'll also kick out a live output at a 2x slow-mo, right? And if you're shooting, say, 240 frames progressively, it's going to kick it out in either 1080i or 720p out that SDI spigot. So if you push that out to a transmitter and now back up to a receiver that you're running into your channel's replay, if that replay tech sees something coming in slow-mo, he or she or they can start clipping that off, and now you can work that way into your playlist, right? Well, that's a very inexpensive way to get high frame rate added. The problem was everybody I took it to loved it, and this was, I'd say, 7 years ago that I was doing this stuff, 8 years ago. The problem is most of those in-house people were saying, hey, well, my day hire expects this camera on a shoulder, right? They basically just point and zoom and focus. Everything else is being done remotely. I can't hand that camera to a day hire. They wouldn't know what to do. So it would only work with the groups that actually had in-house staff that were, quite frankly, young enough or savvy enough to deal with these large format cameras that were just totally different from the realm of what they're used to. So to answer your question more directly, it's been a process to get to this point. And I'm glad that we're getting there, but it is absolutely a little bit of a demarcation point where you have the shoulder mount cameras are typically the older guard, and these smaller form factor DSLRs and the mirrorless cameras and these cameras like this where you actually have local control. Those are where all the younger generations are learning on. But I think it's creating a really nice complex tool set that there's a little bit for everybody, which is kind of cool.
One seems to be more execution style and the other seems to be more artistic. Is there a blend in there somewhere?
There is. And I can't say who, but I have actually spent quite a bit of time, because this is what you were asking about, is can you go to them? Again, if I have a relationship with these people, I can talk to them. Otherwise, we try to, when I say I was a drug dealer, I try to basically allow that to get the word going and then provide loaners, and then we basically kind of plant these seeds and then the word gets around. But it's nice having these relationships with the national groups because they tend to have that buzz and a lot of weight behind it, so it tends to kind of drive it to fruition a bit quicker. But sorry, I just closed the loop on the last question. What was this question again?
No, is there a blend between the execution style where, typical handheld where you're running around on the field, and these ones that can live on a camera stabilizer where you're getting more artistic shots?
And really, you can still kind of get one of these cameras to still kind of look like a shoulder mount camera. You just have to stop down, you have to open the other ones up and all that. It's just a matter of finding that nice blend of what actually executes for a really nice live broadcast. Some director producer teams are not going to like that sort of intercut that goes from a 2/3 inch game cover to a large format cover, but you're seeing some that are blending it a little bit more, stopping down, making the depth of field not quite as shallow, opening it up a little bit but still maintaining cinematic, but where they have those benefits of the autofocus. And then you're starting to see some of these large format cameras that we have, some that are out there on a lot of these major broadcasts in these game coverage positions, whether it's top carts or slash positions or end zone options, and not just football. It's across these other all these other coverages, like specialty things for the World Series or these championship series and the like. So those kind of big games where the budgets are higher, they know that they're going to make more revenue. They're starting to bring out these tools. And they're trying them out leading into these playoff games or whatever that are going to be these big showcase moments to get those hero shots. So you're starting to see that creep its way into it more, because now we're coming out with system level cameras that have these larger formats to get that more shallow depth of field. And it's just coming down to the producer directors getting their head around the technology and how to harness that power and then execute it into a really high-end broadcast. And we're seeing that today.
When you're talking to the producer director, I imagine there's a certain period of time where you're testing and trying things out so that you can have the big reveal. How long does that take, and do the leagues have any input in that?
Ooh, that is a really good question. The latter half of that. Do the leagues have input on that? So the first part of that question, it does tend to take a while, because it's not like, oh, do it once and it works. Okay, it's also like you could hand a producer director team the greatest tools in the world, whether they find a fit for it in their execution of the rundown and their game coverage plan. Because a lot of these guys, I don't mean only guys, a lot of these people in these positions have very kind of fixed roles in the way they like to do it, and their coverage map, and the muscle memory of going to this camera in this part of the broadcast, or however this play based on down and distance. I'm focusing on football because that's where the real orchestration occurs, with so many different camera angles, so much area to cover, so many storylines. But it does take a while, because it's not just confirming the technology, it's also finding a fit as the tool in the actual execution of said live broadcast. Now you're seeing a lot of the stuff being deployed outside of the live side, picking off things and then being regurgitated later on for rundowns of post pieces to follow up on that, or maybe they're just for bumpers for future broadcasts with those teams involved in those players. But everything gets used. But I think in terms of the leagues or the groups or broadcasters actually having a say, it's interesting from sport to sport. At the end of the day, they want to just go with what's going to make their sport look better, and so a lot of those decisions are put in the hands of the broadcast rights holders. But I know that the NFL is very interested in stuff. But at the end of the day, it comes down to a team by team as well, because the big issue is, well, hey, if we got this great camera angle, but it's going to kill 40 seats that are $1,000 a ticket, that's probably not going to play, right? So those also go into it. It's like, all right, where can we put this? And that's why you're starting to see a lot of these mountable POV cameras that don't take up a whole lot of space. Like the pylon cam's a great example, where you now see 4 different cameras in each pylon to get these different angles. And not only is it neat to have the camera in there, but that's also coming into another channel of replay that has to be managed. And so as you see the team come down and get into the red zone, now you see the operators starting to look at different camera angles that they weren't paying attention to in the middle of the field, right? So it's really interesting to watch that all play out and how technology is evolving and being deployed. But it all has to first prove the technology and then find where's the home for that technology. Nobody's going to basically deploy something unless it actually makes sense in an additive way.
It reminds me, as we talk here, of the early days of NFL films, where it was actually film, but now we're getting the camera technology provided by Sony and some others that are able to do that kind of film look, and it's almost like instantaneous, whereas NFL films you had to wait weeks or months to see it, something like that.
And that's the beauty of digital cinema or digital cameras, is the immediacy of it. There's nothing to, if you have a good color profile in your camera where you can literally just shoot and scoot, that's great. If the camera has enough dynamic range to hold that and you can shoot in a way that's shoot and scoot, or if you shoot in a way that's kind of protecting that dynamic range and the contrast and all those things, and you can kind of paint in stuff later on. That's commonly done on the post side and film and the like, but you're getting great camera quality, great imagery, and it's just a matter of who wants to pick whatever tool.
It's really cool to see how things, again, as a camera operator, how things have changed with the shallow depth of field and just camera placements. You'd mentioned where certain cameras or the types of cameras that are out there, Skycam. How many different possibilities are there? Have they been exhausted yet, or are there somebody still looking for different ways to
Yeah,
cover
I'm not going to be as bold to say that, oh, they're exhausted. There's nowhere else. There's going to be plenty of stuff coming out. It's really neat to see just how the abilities just become more and more jam-packed inside these cameras. I mean, this camera here is like a $6,000 camera body, but it can do stuff that $70,000 cameras of yesteryear couldn't even dream of doing. But to answer your question, there's the Skycam positions, there's the drones that have just blown up of late, and everybody doing these really extended one-shots with these hotshot pilots getting this incredible stuff. I mean, I've had the blessing to be on a couple of Titleist shoots for commercials, and seeing what those guys are doing with drones and with these ultimate arms and things. It's only coming down to, you're only limited by the director's creativity and also budget, right? So, but with no end in sight for either of those, the sky is absolutely the limit. Not to mention what can be done in the virtual space now, or metasphere, or whatever you want to call it. But the camera technology has evolved to where you get so much more packed into such a tight, confined space that, having mountable cameras isn't too far away. And they keep trying these things out in these minor league development leagues, like USFL and the like, the XFL, as this thing comes out. Those have proven to be kind of training grounds for technology, breeding grounds, if you will, petri dishes. That, as much as the play itself, is exciting. You may have noticed during the pandemic when they did the most recent last season of the USFL, there was one game where they had like 6 different drones, it seemed, because all you could hear was drones and the audio of the drones, and it was a bit just, I imagine being the A1 on that, going, oh my God, I can't get rid of this, it's killing me. But the angles you were getting for some of those broadcasts and these really elaborate moves that you find them working their way in, maybe not with a drone inside the stadium, but they're using Skycam in that same style of doing a whip around and starting from a walk and talk and then working its way back behind the kick as they kick off, and it's seamless. It's really impressive to see how these producer-director combos are taking that technology cue, working it out in these minor leagues or seeing others doing. And then the nice thing I will say is that working in these different fields, yes, there's competitive things. People want to basically do it better than the others, but the amount of information sharing that goes on behind the scenes of all these technology pros is really impressive. Everybody wants to push each other to do the next greatest thing, and it's cool. So the drones are big. All these POV cameras are great. I think it's just as the technology evolves, it's just, again, that creativity and budget is the only real limitation there.
We've talked mostly about the broadcast portion that the viewers see at home, but you also work with stadiums and arenas to make sure that they're getting stuff, because that's become just as much entertainment as the game inside that venue. And how does that technology play into what you're doing now?
So that's the interesting part is, I personally am more now in a sales capacity. I'm more on the stadium and venue side than I am on the broadcast side. It's actually my counterparts that do the networks and the broadcast side. However, because I have such a long-standing relationship with a lot of the engineering and tech ops people that I've worked with and getting Scenics cameras placed and the like, that I'll, especially when they do a lot of trials in SoFi, and I do handle the Amazon sports account, and so I've been lucky to have a nice relationship with those guys and do a lot of stuff that they're doing with NBC. I'm very much on both sides of that tug of war that exists, right? It's the game people at the venue are trying to pull the rope to get people in the stands, and it's the people on the broadcast side that are going analytics crazy with all these stats and this and that and all these new technologies to try to force people to say, look, I don't want to spend all the time and money, and I'm going to sit my butt on the couch and be able to hit pause and grab a beer and hit the restroom or whatever the case may be. They're constantly at odds with each other to deliver the best product. And so the thing that's really been big for the in-house has been, all right, this idea, the Megalodon, emulating that live broadcast, but still inspiring that sort of palpable feeling, that visceral, emotional feeling of being in the venue and hearing the crowd go wild. And as much as we're primarily talking about football, one of my favorite things to go to, and I've shot a ton of it over the years, mostly in the minor league side on the promotions, but MMA is a wonderful, I think my two favorite things to attend are MMA and hockey live. They are so incredibly well run They're just exciting because you never know, but you'll know that they're always going to bring it, right? Let's be honest, there's some sports that might kind of flip the switch and just not show up, and you go to a game, this team has no business losing this team it somehow loses by 40, right? But it never seems to be that way in hockey, where you got 50-second shifts, they're just grinding it out, great entertainment. And those MMA fights, whether it's at a regional level or at the UFC level or one or anything like that, Bellator, whatever, those events are phenomenal to watch. Now, are they as good to watch at home? Just as good to watch at home, because on the UFC side, they have their tried and true rundown. It's almost identical as it's been for 20 years. Now they start to do more elaborate walk and talks and walking into the camera and then handing off down the line and stuff. They've gotten really clever in those areas, but it's really fascinating to see that evolution of the live versus in-home. So in-home right now, they're adding the new tools of the large format cameras. They're doing wireless, people running around. Some places will incorporate and own their own Skycam or system like that, where maybe it's a rent-to-own thing and they have their first right of refusal to basically operate that. But when it's not a home game, they'll basically rent it back to Skycam, and Skycam deploys it, or whatever the case is. There's a lot of that stuff going on. But it really is about that significant pull on the rope to get people in the seats. And it can be difficult because that's a commitment, especially for a UFC event. That's a 5-hour day at the venue. It's a lot of sitting, Yeah.
It's amazing, the technology. And I've talked to, some people who are working with gaming and trying to make, like, for instance, MLB The Show, trying to make that look more like live. And then the game is borrowing that to make the games feel more like a video game. And that started with, to my understanding, David Hill, who was at Fox, and it's just gone on and on. Where is the future of cameras? I know ESPN tried the 3D, that just lasted for a couple of years. Is it virtual? Is it augmented reality? How if how does that play into it?
Well, that's a funny question. If I had the crystal ball, I could tell you the trends or where things are trending. It's neat to see that even on some of these smaller broadcasts, the technology has gotten so good that you're seeing a lot of these augmented realities working their way into non-national shows, primarily national, but it doesn't have to be, because there are ways to get around and do it. It's just, if you understand the technology and making sure that the lens is in a certain way to where you can actually scale it and actually fits, and it creates that sort of three-dimensional view, and the graphics are good, that's been a nice add that's made its way in the last few years. It's an interesting question. I think it's really just more of a case of what's going to feed in. I think the gambling's the big one, and if there's a way with zero latency to feed into that gambling side inside of a broadcast, I think now that's probably where things are going, because trying to get the gambling training wheels off of at some of these states and open up the doors, that's been really interesting, and everybody's jumping on with all the different apps and the like, and all the different sponsors and different programming. But I think that and you mentioned esports, that following is ravenous, and it's insane because they're doing things at a very inexpensive level, and they're doing things where they're following the sun from a support and driving side, and they're delivering stuff from out of production control rooms, in Europe, and they're basically running events remotely in Brazil, and they're doing it with milliseconds of delay. It's incredible, or latency, and therefore you have the ability to drive events without having to have all this expense and T&E and all the other stuff on location. That right there is where things are really going to get interesting in the next few years.
You've mentioned a lot of the events that you've worked on. What are some of the most favorite events that you've been a part of?
I've had the pleasure and blessing to work just about every single sports event. Although ironically, this last year at SoFi was my first Super Bowl. It was as I thought. It was a cool thing to be at, but oof, what a zoo! The national championship. I was happened to be shooting for Clemson when they knocked off Alabama with that famous Renfro catch in the end zone. That was a cool moment. I had a pink vest, so I was one of the few to get that. And it's neat to be in the eye of the hurricane when Coach Sweeney is basically chirping at the team and saying, "Hey, we're all in. Just keep your heads up." They were down at half. We got this. and being there, that's kind of a neat deal. I've been on stage, at Madison Square Garden shooting Andre Bocelli and get to do some cool things. And I will say, I thought that was the high water mark just because I was in band in high school. I really enjoy classical music, but I'm a bit kind of an enigma, I guess, in the sense that Metallica was my favorite band. So therefore, naturally, Metallica's S&M is my favorite all-time album. But a mixture of Andre Bocelli, and I've been blessed to actually shoot a number of events behind the scenes for the singer, profoundly talented singer and actress, Kristen Chenoweth. So I was actually able to shoot her at Madison Square Garden performing with Bocelli. That was incredible, and I thought that was kind of the high water mark, right up there with shooting the national championship for Clemson. But a couple of years later, I wound up being asked by their crew to help them out to cover the LDS Christmas concert a few years ago, where Kristen was the headline act, where it was 3 days of her effectively doing the highest end Broadway show you could imagine, but with this much larger screen or stage, 150 plus orchestra, 150 plus choir, Christmas theme, just incredible songs. I always get the chills just talking about it. And being there backstage and shooting behind the scenes and being there for 3 days and seeing that production with a wall of 18,000 people, 7 or 8 stories higher, however it is, it's like 120 degrees in this conference center. It is the most impressive thing I've ever seen. The performance was, it was indelible in my mind and sticks to me and still gives me this visceral reaction to this day that is just, I get emotional just talking about it. It was kind of the culmination of a pretty freaking cool career, if you ask me, of things I've gotten to do. And it just keeps going. So, that was pretty special.
You shared with me some photos that I'd like to just run through
Sure,
real quick here. And just to kind of get your thoughts on some of the cool things that you've been a part of in sports. This here, I'll just let you explain which photo it is when it comes up.
So Al Michaels is who I wanted to be when I grew up, and happened to have the luxury of working an event for the Broncos, actually. And I think that was a Sunday night game where it was Broncos and Packers, and both teams were undefeated at the time. I think it was still in November. And so at the tail end of the pregame show, I had a flip card. I wrote that on there. I was asked to get a picture with him, and he was kind enough to snap a photo. And I wound up actually taking a printout of this with me to the Super Bowl last year, knowing that that was going to be his last game. And the NBC crew was kind enough to let me up there. And the moment that broadcast was over, they put me in front with him, and he signed it. And now I got that thing framed upstairs. So that was pretty cool. That guy, I'm a big hockey fan. He's a big Kings fan. So that's a neat moment with the legend, the guy who I wanted to be. And that's before I heard myself recorded, and I go, yeah, I probably should think about some other type of career. That right there was a seminal moment in reality show broadcast history. That was Survivor. We did a big test at Television City with the TV City crew and the Survivor crew, and that's all my Sony counterparts, and then Mr. Tom Bender from Canon. We kind of led a trial. They made a makeshift kind of tribal council there in one of the studios. And that's where we tested out HD for the first time on Survivor. It was a huge hit, and it wound up, they haven't looked back. In fact, they just started the last season that was just shot and aired in the fall was with our newest camera, so that they can actually shoot it at a higher quality. But that was the beginning. That opened up the floodgates for unscripted programming moving to HD. This was funny. This was an Instagram post that a friend of mine happened to be shooting for I think that was the Cowboys and Giants, that game. I think I was actually shooting for the Giants, but or maybe that was the Cowboys and the Patriots, I forget. But do you see any other Cowboys there?
I don't.
So that was a friend of mine that's there are a lot of Cowboy fans out there, but one of my high school classmates is a big Cowboy fan and saw that and forwarded it to me, and she's like, hey, is that you? I'm like, yeah, that is me, actually. That's kind of funny. That's a great stadium to watch a game, and even better to shoot. This right here is one of the shots that I'm really happy about, because I didn't know they were going to shoot that. And this is This is where doing your homework helps, because I would always try to get a sense for what the rundown is ahead of the game, so I know what's going to happen at what time, so I can be in the best position, get the best shot. Now, this was a case where the ASU guys had given me a credential, and everything that I would shoot gets back to them, and they get a copy of it for free. And so this was a nice way where I would basically get credentials for about 8 or 9 years. I'd work on the weekends. I'd extend my trip and just shoot for the local teams and give them the content for free. And I was just kind of showcasing our cameras, and wound up selling a ton of cameras in my wake. And so it just built up that credibility, understanding what people are looking to do, trying to raise the production level a little bit with these sort of add-on cameras, and it's been really good. But the neat thing about this shot here is this, in their brand new gym that they've had open a couple of years now on the north side of the stadium, they have this shot on the wall as you walk into the gym. And so I'm like, hey, there's me. That's kind of fun. This is the Clemson guys, the year that they won the national championship. And the funny thing is I ran down that hill after touching the rock, and you run down and shooting some video behind the players. That was the only game they lost that season. But if you look at this crew, that's a bunch of legends on the field right there. So almost every single one of them has been placed into much higher positions and is killing it in the industry. So that creative team there, they don't recharge, they just reload. It's impressive, the talent that they put through in the program there. So this is just a case of being in town, getting a credential. But this was getting towards the end of Larry Fitzgerald's career, and I was like, this might be his last home game. I want to get a unique shot. And I was initially in the center of the midfield. I'm like, there's like 8 other people here. I was thinking of getting a different shot. And so I'm like, well, I'm just going to go back there. I'm not employed by the team. What do they do? Fire me? They gave me a credential. I could always ask for forgiveness. And I will admit, I did get chewed out by the game director because apparently when I ran out, he's like, why is DeRoches in my shot? And that was 5 seconds of pain for them. But from what I'm told, they used the daylights out of that clip. So of what I shot. So that's kind of a neat moment. And I just like, hey, I'm going to get a different shot that they may not already have to get a different perspective of a legend. Larry legend. So the NHRA is near and dear to my heart. I've struck up a nice relationship with them over the last 5 or 6 years, and they'd have me come out and shoot some stuff. So I was shooting a lot of high frame rate, right on like 5 feet from the back tire as it's spinning out and getting stuff in slow-mo. But when you do that, you're getting track and tire and gunk chewed up all over you, and it's really messy. So this was just a day out in Pomona where I was just shooting some stuff for them. I had a coworker, Katie, who's my camera assist for the day. We both have track all over our face, look like freckles. And then the mascot for the Kings, Kingston, was out there, and I'm a big Kings fan, so that's what that was about. My whole point is I try to be additive to my existing customers that I already have. I call on like the Vikings here. I've got great friends that work for them, and I happen to be in town. Hey, give me a credential. I'll shoot some stuff for them. And again, at the time, that's an FS5 I'm shooting right there. And obviously, Diggs doesn't play for them anymore. So this was a while ago. But just a way to, hey, let me say thanks for your support in the business. So give me a credential. I'll run around, shoot some stuff, get you some great content. Nowadays, this footage is like a pebble in the ocean. They got these kind of cameras everywhere. But when I first started doing this was 100% additive, that they didn't have these tools. And so it was like, hey, you want to give us this great motivational footage with high frame rate stuff and all these different angles. So long lens, shooting right down the gut of the tunnel. And it's just neat to be able to, it's a great way to watch a game, that's for sure. But this was my way to give back, but also kind of, as I mentioned, kind of be a bit of a drug dealer and try to dangle a carrot of some new technology for some of these guys. Not expensive stuff, but just stuff that every team could afford as an additive. And so, this is another case, the Sportsnet LA guys, Spectrum, where the Dodgers, Galaxy, and the Lakers, that's who they cover. So this was at an Angels game where they're playing the Dodgers. So it's me with the crew there. They've got a couple of F-55s out there for a lot of their all-access stuff. And they got a gimbal with a camera doing some stuff. That's just more stabilization because autofocus didn't really exist in those cameras back then because this is a while ago. Mm-hmm. But the reason why that credit's on there is because that was the Dodgers staff photog that was kind enough to snap that and provide it. So good guy. So what was that? Yeah, that's 6 years ago. Holy cow! It's just a great way to be additive as a technology partner, quite frankly.
The big camera in the middle is really what I started with. To me, it's amazing how far the technology's come, and it's just fun to use these cameras.
100%. This is me leveraging the fact that I work for Sony by being there. There was some stuff we were doing specific to Survivor, some stuff specific to some customers. We had some customers in, we had some high-end meetings, and I'm like, well, if I got to be here, might as well get a credential and shoot inside the rope. So that's me squatting down to the bottom right hand of the frame there, getting an upshot with those cameras that have the high frame rate with an end trigger. So it was great. You have a end trigger, half duration, 240 frames a second. You wait for them to basically hit the ball and then wait a beat and a half and then hit record, and it goes back, and what you have is encapsulated clip right when they start their backswing. So it was a great way to get some great content. This was a picture that I snapped off of a rebroadcast of this UFC event that was in Anaheim, and I was just being there to support the cameras that were on the truck, because it was one of the first 4K trucks that they had used for a pay-per-view. And so I basically was there to support it, met with their director, Anthony, and their camera crew, and we're just being in a supportive nature, and happened to be sitting there. And once he came out, I stood up from my position by the cage and just snapped off a shot. So this is just some of the things that I'll do from time to time. In this case, it's I think I was doing a lead into a track session and just talking about some technology. But I'll actually be on a panel mid-December of this year talking about large format digital cinema incorporation into live events. So it's neat to be considered one of those people in the industry that can be listened to and have something to say that's complementary to the technology and helpful to kind of help people realize their visions of executing a certain live event here. But at the end of the day, I like to be an instructor or an educator, and I'm a person that's big on bringing up the younger generation. I've been spending a lot of time. I mentioned 8 years of shooting stuff. It was primarily with colleges and young up-and-comers to try to get them to push the envelope and expose them to some tools. And I've had that, just you mentioned about Jim Dove. It's been neat to kind of be involved and watch some of these younger talent kind of come up through the ranks and really kind of killing it now, and having these really high profile gigs doing, whether it's social media or just just general storytelling. And so I'm actually have the ability now. We've got these technology partnerships we do with a lot of different schools, and since I'm on the sports side, I actually get to nominate, and then we have these technology partnerships where we actually seed equipment to the USCs of the world, and to the Texases and the Oklahomas and the UCF. So I've been heavily involved, and the Clemsons of kind of seeding equipment, providing the technology where it's just bringing up the next level of the next generation of talent.
I'll just go through a couple more photos here.
This one cracks me up because for years I would work with the Giants whenever I'd be in New York, because our headquarters are based in New Jersey, so I'd be out there a lot, and I'd try to make the trips if I could around when they'd be in town, because I love my guys at the Giants. They're always great people to work with. And my coworker that manages the Giants, he'd always be happy that I'd provide some attention to them. But this was fun because I'm a bit of an LSU football fan, and having shot some of his games when he was in college, this was his first game as a pro. He missed a few weeks with a hammy, and his first game, they're playing the Falcons. I'm shooting for the Giants. He catches a touchdown. He runs off the field at the end of the game, and that's me with a wonderful fashion statement with the pants, and chased him down. But the funny thing is, the top half of that, if you crop that, that's what was on the wallpaper of the Giants website the next day. And most of my New Jersey coworkers are Giants fans. And so I got a text that day from a buddy, and I'm now back in LA, and he says, "Hey, is this you?" And I go, "Oh, that is me. That's pretty funny." So yeah, he looks like a little baby there. He's such a young kid. He's his hair is actually more of a natural color, and yeah. I wound up going into the locker room, not locker room, but the press room, and I got a picture of him on my phone right before I went out and met the press for the first time, and he just looks like a schoolboy. It's a trip. I love this photo because I've got this a big print of this in my upstairs man cave. If you see by the flag squatted down on the bottom in the middle of the gauntlet, that's me squatted down getting that ground level shot with a long lens. Slow-mo of the players coming out with the smoke. This was the first home game after they redid Husky Stadium when they played Boise State, and yeah, what a great venue that is. It's widely considered the greatest setting in college football, but I tend to agree. It's right up there. It's wonderful there. It's a great stadium.
It is so cool to talk to you, especially when I met you kind of by accident. I'm fascinated with all the technology and the camera. You know, cameras make the show because that's what everybody watches.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting how you're able to do it. I think your experience as an engineer and then applying it in the artistic and actual execution of it kind of makes it even more valuable, in my opinion, when you're talking to producer director who's making a decision and then going back to, I'm sure, your engineering teams to try and figure out solutions to maybe what they're looking for. That's why I wanted to have you on, is to try and talk through and let people know how this happens, because it's not just putting a camera out there and making it work. It's really thinking it through.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, I'll just tell you that how this worked for me in the job I have now. And look, I was in a place where I had a kid on the way, as I mentioned earlier. You know, my daughter was born 2 weeks after my senior year of baseball was done. I needed some money, and I needed some money fast. Plus, I still had another semester of school left. So my daughter was actually being passed back and forth between classes between my daughter's mom and I. And it was a pretty gnarly time. So I kind of beat down when I asked my internship coordinator, hey, is there any chance you can find me a paid internship because I need some money? I went back home to Anaheim and I worked at the Disneyland Hotel every single day the entire summer except for the week that my daughter was born. Went back to school and my internship coordinator said, hey, there's this opportunity at Sony. It pays $8 an hour. I'm like, I don't care what it is, I'll take it. So I beat the doors down on the hiring manager and basically pestered him until he gave me an interview, and thankfully that went okay. He signed me up as an intern, and I've been with him ever since. But it was one of those cases where I got my foot in the door, and early on in my career after my internship, they hired me on as a contractor, or held on to me. And early on, I had to give training for a nonlinear editing software, and my job was to train all the sales support engineers. And when I met those guys, these are industry legends that were the people that I worked in that. I eventually worked in that capacity for 18 years, and I was like, that is the job I want. That was the job I always coveted. And so I always worked to try to get up to that point. I eventually got there and did that for 18 years and made so many relationships and got to do so many different roles and wore so many different hats to where ultimately they're like, hey, you know all the sports people, you should basically be the sports guy. I'm like, I don't want to be a sales guy. And they ultimately 3 different times they told me, well, if you don't become the sales guy, you may not have a job anymore. I'm like, hey, how much does it pay? So at the end of the day, before I became into sales though, I noticed that we were spending a lot of money to commission these shoots to promote cameras at our trade shows, and we would spend $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for a video that had a lady in clothing in a nice house, and it looked really nice, but it wasn't relevant to anybody. I'm like, that doesn't help. What are we doing? And so I'm like, well, we have this camera, and I know these needs that people do. So I wound up taking a camera, and I started going out and doing all this shooting. And I effectively created a market, but I saw a hole, and I'm like, I'm going to tell everybody through grassroots effort. And I would go to trade shows, and I'd do this, and I'd meet these people, and I'd interact with them, and I would work every single weekend, sometimes 2 to 3 games a weekend, shooting stuff, giving them the content, backing the stuff up, and then I would also take it and use it for private demos, and it was helping in that way. So I actually had demo content that was actually relevant to who we were trying to sell to in the killer applications and features that really were next level stuff that not everybody had. So I effectively found a hole and just was, entrepreneurial in a way, and resourceful, I guess. And thankfully I had the backing of my managers that I would tell, here's my plan, here's what I'm going to do. And it wasn't always agreed upon, but I got the support to just give me the rope to do what I would do. And it turned into something special. And because I got a chance to do all that and shoot all those things, I hope that they don't see me as this Sony shill. I'm just a person that's going to tell them like it is, and I like to educate, as I mentioned earlier, but I love supporting the younger generation and kind of helping them avoid, or even the pros that have been doing stuff that maybe focused on their stuff and now they're wanting to kind of chip away at some of these things, where I can basically give that information to them to keep them from having to re-engineer the wheel or reinvent that wheel or trying to spend 5 hours or 5 days trying to test it themselves, and give them some of the feedback where I can say, hey, here's what's being done by X and here's what's being done by Y. I'm not naming them specifically, but here's how it's done on this level, and this is where you might want to consider, because if you're doing these things, this is the best practice. And the nice thing is in the industry, whether it's competing networks and stuff, those directors, producers, they do tend to talk and they share it and compare notes. It's really fascinating how kind of supportive everybody is. And I am absolutely all about that.
And you do a great job of building relationships from the sounds of everything that you've been able to do. So that's important as well.
I like people, you know, and if they're not, you know, as long as they're not a turd. But look, we all have our good days and bad days. But no, it's just it's nice to work for a company that has great kind of tools, and then also being able to work with people that really have unbelievable visions to really get to that next level together. And that's the best part of my job as I see it.
All right. Well, I've got only 2 questions left for you unless something else comes up. What is the most special credential that you have?
Well, I think that the most special credential I have is either a toss-up of the national championship, the first time that Clemson won the national championship when they beat Alabama because they weren't expected to win. That was cool. And that thing I mentioned, the Christmas concert with shooting with Kristen Chenoweth for the LDS Church and getting these private tours and the Tabernacle Choir and all this other stuff, that was a great experience. But probably the coolest thing I ever got to do, because I was born in the States, but I'm kind of Canadian roots, so I'm a big hockey fan. I'm a big Kings fan, and I am friends with the Sharks, because when I went to San Jose, that became my kind of adoptive hockey team. The franchise started when I was going to school out there. The Sharks hosted the Kings at Levi Stadium for the outdoor series, the stadium series, and the Sharks were kind enough to say, hey, if you're going to shoot it with us, we'll have you come out and shoot, but if you want to shoot, there's a media skate. I'm like, oh my God. So I got to skate with the media, and there was only like 20 media that could skate. It was so much fun. I've got great video of me just running around, skating on the ice, looking up to the video board, and just open ice. There was like literally 20 of us on this ice rink, and it was, I think, a day or two before the players even got to skate on it. So that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen or got a chance to do, because who would ever think they're going to play those events, right? As a kid, that wouldn't even be something you would ever dream of, but to actually get to skate on that ice, that was pretty special.
Yeah. All right. And then finally, what is your favorite sports movie?
Favorite sports movie? Favorite movie is easy. That's Shawshank Redemption. That's one of those movies that you step on, you just have to watch the rest of it. Oh, okay, well, I had plans for 20 minutes, but that's going to have to wait until this movie's over.
Yep.
Sports movie. Gosh. It's not the greatest movie. It's probably my favorite funny movie. Slapshot's great, just from the quotability of it. I have to say, honestly, from a baseball movie, Bull Durham's great. But I've been warming up so much of late to A League of Their Own, just because the John Lovitz scenes, the Tom Hanks scenes, there's so many great parts in that movie that it doesn't get the acclaim. And I'm a big underdog guy. I love rooting for the underdog. And I think A League of Their Own doesn't get enough acclaim as being the good sports movie that it is, because there's more depth to it than just a sports movie. But my Lord, it's awesome. Again, probably I like rooting for dark horses. That would probably be my dark horse choice.
Well, I had to throw a curveball because when I sent you this question, it was just just movie. So I'll give that to you. But that I'll have to check out A League of Their Own again. It's been a while. So, all right, Mike. As we close this out, how can people find out more about Sony's camera products, lenses, all that stuff?
One way to get to our website, if you want, is pro.sony.com. But I think maybe the better route might be to just reach out to me directly. I'll provide you my information, and they can just reach out to me, and I can kind of fine-tune their needs and direct them to whoever they need to talk to, if not myself. But yeah, I would welcome that, because I'm not just... I learned this is a great expression. I learned this from the president and head of corporate partnerships from Sporting KC. I had a meeting at NAB a few years ago, and there's look, we're looking for somebody that's not a transactional relationship. We had those before. That's of no interest. I'm like, oh, I love that. And that has been my mantra. And it's always how I've been anyway, just it resonated with me. But I like being that guy that I'm not the guy that's going to sell you something and never going to hear from me again. I'm the guy that's going to be there whenever you call. I'll be reaching out whenever I'm in town. I'll be calling whenever there's something I think that's relative to what you need that may have come out, knowing your plight or whatever your coverage map is and your mindset and your tool set. That's me all day. So I would love to have people reach out to me directly if that's of interest. Otherwise, there's the website.
Very good. Mike DesRoches, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I look forward to seeing what is out there coming soon in the next, at least 10 years.
Yeah,
it seems like everything's changing so quick. Yeah,
my pleasure, Don. Thanks, sir.
Thanks to Mike DesRoches for sharing a bit about his career and the camera technology. I started my career as a camera operator in Phoenix and have used them over the years, but after talking with Mike, I'm envious of what these cameras can do now, and it's really cool to see sporting events look more cinematic. So the next time you're watching, see if you can notice the difference. Again, if you're listening, you can check out some of the visuals on YouTube at Sportsmaking. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform. If there's someone that works in sports that you'd like to hear from, drop a comment on YouTube or on the Facebook page. Also, like, share, and review. Thank you for listening to Sports in the Making. I'm your host, Don Cardona.